Let's get started. Welcome to the Business Clinic, niche marketing versus general marketing. When and how is it time to broaden your reach? And I've got Heather with me today. Feel free to unmute yourself, Heather, and say hello.
Hi, I'm so excited. Thank you for having me.
Now, before we get underway, I just want to mention this month's sponsor. It's very important to me, these sponsors who help subsidize the free work that I do. So White Fox is the sponsor this month. They are a paid publishing service. They're based in the UK, but also have offices in the US. If you're looking for a really solid service firm who will help you publish your book, I can say that they are a trusted and legitimate firm full of publishing professionals. You can learn more about them at wearewhitefox.com. So thank you to them. Okay, so I'll do it just a really brief introduction of Heather, and then I'm going to have her talk a little bit about herself and add in any other color she would like. So she's already got 5 books published with Moody Publishers. For those who don't know, that's a very well-established publisher that primarily serves the Christian market, and she's also self-published some books. She's got a very full speaking schedule that's focused on Christian audiences, which tie into those books. And then she has a book upcoming for release this fall with Moody on how to have better conversations. And it's, at least from my perspective, Heather, you may feel differently. It feels a bit of a departure from some of the earlier work because the title isn't so Christian focused. So like there isn't Jesus in the title. Right. So it could presumably be for a very wide audience, which brings us to today's challenge. So when you initially wrote me, Heather, this is exactly what you said, and it's why we're here, because I think it's a very interesting issue. I would like to pivot to a general marketing plan without losing my unique branding as a Christian public figure. How would a general market approach differ from a niche or Christian marketing plan? Or is it in fact better to stick with proven demographic sales? So Heather, I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about this and just add whatever you would like about your situation.
Well, the book that I'm writing on how to have better conversations flows out of a book I wrote on helping people be able to have meaningful conversations about their faith. And what happened was a lot of the feedback was, well, we don't even know how to have good conversations in general. We're in such a culture of isolation and incivility. So the new book quickly became rooted in social science, drawing on the wisdom literature of the Bible. So as I wrote it, I thought Moody was even trying to discuss, okay, is this a general market release? Should we keep it within our Christian part of the Christian part of Moody, because they also have a general market part. Gary Chapman did write the foreword to the book. He wrote The 5 Love Languages, which is considered a general market release. So the position I'm in is trying to figure out how to best market this book in a way that will serve the most people, but also make it clear it has these kind of Christian principles in it, but you don't have to be a person of faith to gain a lot of value from the book. So I just wanted to know how to do that and how other people do that. And I guess it also relates to anyone trying to change kind of how their branding has been. So I published my first book in 2015 that became the bestseller. So I've been in this world for 8 years speaking and writing, and now I feel like I'm about to move in a new direction.
Excellent. So I took a look at this book, and I want others to know a little bit more about it too. It's a great cover, by the way. I really like this cover. I hope you like it too.
Oh, I love it. Moody has such a great design team. They are a fantastic publisher, and I got to weigh in on this. They provided a portfolio for me, and I chose this one.
Okay, wonderful. And the foreword by Gary Chapman feels to me like a huge win.
Yes.
I mean, for those who don't know him or his book, The 5 Love Languages, you might be living in a cave if you haven't heard of that book. I mean, it's a perennial bestseller. And so and I also see some parallels here between maybe kind of like the structure of his book and the structure of your book.
That's right.
Yeah. So here's just a brief description of the book. I found this on Amazon. It's not the entire description, but I think it gives people a good sense of how the publisher is approaching this, which I always like to try and suss out. So conversation is getting harder. We're feeling more isolated. Loneliness is becoming an epidemic. The 6 Conversations reflects one of the deepest passions of Dr. Heather Holleman's heart to connect people in loving community. Professor Holleman often fields questions like, how can I foster meaningful connection with others? Why doesn't anyone ever ask meaningful questions? If my personal happiness depends upon having warm relationships, like all the research shows, how can I become a better conversationalist and create connection? Can you relate? Are you longing for loving, meaningful, and joyful conversations, for practical skills to connect with others? And then it continues with some more in-depth information about what the book does. So obviously in this description, there is, to me, like if I had just seen this out in the wild, I didn't know anything about you or about your background, I wouldn't consider this a Christian book. It does truly feel like a general market book. But I do have some questions for you.
Yes.
So here they are listed. Starting with how much scripture is quoted. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. By the way, these are great questions. So the first part of the book depends upon the social science research on the 4 mindsets that you need in order to have a loving conversation. And so I loved writing that chapter. It's deeply rooted in the best social science research about what it means to be curious, believing the best about others, expressing concern, and how to share your life. And I love that chapter. But as a Christian, I was like, does this hold up to what we've already learned from the wisdom literature of the Bible? And so I wrote, the next chapter was called A Theology of a Loving Conversation. And that does rely heavily on 2 passages of scripture, Philippians 2 and Romans 12. But throughout that chapter, I say, if you come from a different faith tradition, you may find that your faith tradition also supports what social science research is telling us now. So that chapter, The Theology of the Loving Conversation, comes directly from what we've learned in the Bible about what it means to love your neighbor as yourself. Then it moves quickly into kind of the more social science research. So there's a lot of practical skills on the basics of a loving conversation, what it means to listen well. And I actually quote a lot of people who are not Christians in those chapters. The very last part of the book is, the very last chapter is called The Greatest Conversation. And I look at the first conversation ever recorded in scripture, which would be in the book of Genesis, which would widely apply to, the Jewish tradition. It's not just the Christian readers of Genesis, where God says, where are you? Who told you you were naked? What have you done? And I do an analysis of those are kind of the questions the culture is asking one another, like, where are you? Who told you who you are? And I kind of make this comparison to Jesus's conversation with the woman at the well. So I would say less than 50%, but it's clear in the chapter on the theology of a loving conversation that I'm really relying on my own Christian tradition to confirm the social science research.
Okay. And there's nothing here that would proselytize or like encourage people to convert. There's nothing like that, I assume.
I think the last chapter is my passion for people to think about that first conversation in scripture and then I connect it back to the book Sent, which won a evangelism an award for the best book on evangelism for the year. I do connect it back to that, like having conversations about your faith. So that's a good question. I need to think about that. Would someone read it and feel like I was trying to convert them? I think they think more that I'm trying to help them come out of loneliness and isolation and ask really meaningful questions. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I don't think it will offend people who come from a different tradition. I think it's more going to challenge them to think through, okay, what does it mean to love people? What have we learned? Yeah. So,
I mean, certainly if this is going to be mainly marketed to the US audiences, that's kind of the first stop for all books, period.
Right.
Everyone is going to be well entrenched in the Judeo-Christian worldview and beliefs. And even if you didn't go to church, you probably know more about Christian worldview than you actually think.
Right.
So I don't think there's anything like from a marketing perspective. I don't think that the book, like even if there's scripture, or even with the material you've talked about, I don't think there's necessarily like, that it couldn't be marketed to a more general audience. But we're going to circle back to that question later, and I think it's something you'll want to consider further.
You've already got me thinking. Yes, you've already really got me thinking about that question. So I love this. Yes.
Do you know if Moody is specifically thinking about breaking you out to a larger market with this? Have they had that discussion with you?
They did have the discussion, and I know that their publishing team thought carefully about this for these very questions that we're talking about, Jane. Like, I have this brand, I speak everywhere, churches, radios, I'm, radio, Christian radio, what would it mean to depart from that and move into the general market? They also decided that because the way I teach things I'm learning in scripture was so meaningful in the book, because there was conversation like, should we remove all of that? Mm-hmm. And they thought, no, I remember them saying, no, Heather loves talking about the Bible. She actually loves talking about Jesus whenever she can. Let's not stifle that in her and remove that from the book. So they kept it under the marketing of the Christian. I don't know what it's called. They have a division of Moody that's not Christian. I just can't remember what it's called. Northfield, maybe, I don't know, maybe So they decided to keep me in the Christian line. But they do recognize that I am getting, podcasts and radio invitations, and, the public high school here, which is an enormous high school of thousands of kids. They've asked me if I'll come in the fall to talk about teaching them how to have better conversations, to how to warmly connect with each other. So already I'm getting kind of these invitations to break out of the just talking about Christian things.
Right. I think from my perspective, the more the book is using Bible stories for their essential wisdom, or what they teach us about life or love or how to have conversations, like, the more I think it will work for the general market. But the more it's used to, I don't know, deepen one's faith or proselytize or try to convert, then that's when it gets more difficult.
Yes.
Okay, so here is like the really hard truth about marketing. There's not really any such thing as general marketing. Certainly there are books like by celebrities or politicians, like the Barack Obama book, autobiography, let's say, where, yes, one might say it's truly for a general audience, and they're going to pull out all the stops. But when you go for a general marketing plan, it doesn't actually give you much to go on in terms of, okay, now, like, what specific steps do you take when the audience is so general? You just have this really fuzzy picture. Whereas I wouldn't necessarily call it niche marketing, but marketing based on specific audience needs or interests or problems, it's much easier to tackle that. So even if we are going to move you from a niche marketing to general marketing, we're still talking about basically increasing the number of audiences, specific audiences that you want to reach, branching out from the Christian audience. So I want to use myself as an example because I know my own book so well. Now, my book is already, this is The Business of Being a Writer. This is already kind of a niche book anyway. However, there's still a lot of very distinct audience segments that were marketed to or could be marketed to. So I wrote it with the MFA audience in mind. That was the audience I primarily wanted to reach. I wanted the book in classrooms. And so if I'm going to market to that set of people, I'm going to be going to the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, because that's the MFA organization, basically, undergraduate and graduate writing programs. There's going to be a lot of exam copies sent out to professors for free. I'm probably going to be paying attention to poets and writers, which serves the MFA market, and also libraries, since I'm focused on universities and schools and having the book used in classrooms. So that's a very particular kind of marketing plan. The people that I reach primarily, actually, it's not the MFA audience. It's unpublished novelists and, to some extent, memoirists. And those people go to different places. Like Thriller Fest would be an example of the sort of event they go to. They're not going to AWP. They're looking for free resources and worksheets. They're not looking for exam copies. They read Writer's Digest, not Poets and Writers. and they might frequent bookstores. And then finally, another market segment would be perhaps self-publishing authors, which I'm really well known in that community too, although importantly, this book isn't necessarily for them. But if I wanted to market and promote to them, I would go to self-pub-con. I would probably do giveaways of some kind, like maybe full editions or a full edition of an earlier book. I would go on the Creative Pen podcast, and this audience tends to prefer Kindle and audio editions. Now, here's something I discovered really quickly. I did a little bit of marketing to the self-publishing community because it's just part of my bread and butter anyway. Like I'd already been on the Creative Pen podcast before. It was easy to do it again, et cetera. But when those people picked up this book, I got the worst reviews from them because it's not really speaking to the self-published author's concerns for the most part. And, you know, when I'm going to be revising the book and I have to think really carefully about, okay, how much do I want to try and think about serving them? Or is this book really just for the other two audiences? And it's too much of a reach to try and serve all three. Now I'm greatly simplifying things here, but I bring it up because I think often when authors think about broadening their audience, they only think about the benefits and not about the repercussions.
Oh, that's a great line. Yes.
So if you reach so broadly and you succeed in that goal, you're probably going to get people who are less of a fit for the book. And sometimes that turns out okay, and sometimes it doesn't. And you see it come up most visibly in the reviews, where people are like, this book wasn't for me, or they can be very mean too. So you have to be prepared for that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it for that reason, but you have to be aware that the book becomes more tangential to some audiences. Okay. So
do you have a business clinic on how to handle negative reviews? I would go to that one. So
don't
by
engage.
the way, I love your book, and I'm launching an entrepreneurship class at Penn State, and I want to use your book for that course. So I'll keep you posted on how Penn State is loving your book. So just a little word of encouragement for Jane. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. So hitting that primary market, that's what I'm looking for.
Yes.
Okay. So this, of course, you have a similar map waiting for you. And this is what I would encourage you to do, as this is your homework, I suppose, after we're done here, is to think about the very distinctive audiences. And I would try and splinter out too in the Christian realm. Not all Christians are the same. So think about, of the Christian audiences you do speak to already, or the ones you know you've reached with your books, you know, you could probably segment them out. And then think about some of the general audiences that you reach, and then start that you could reach, or that you already know exist, and then start segmenting them out. I don't know how much Moody would be willing to help you here, but I bet you anything that in their, I don't know the imprint they have for the general market, but if someone was willing to talk to you about their audience personas, or the certain types that they found, what they look like, where they go, anything that would give you some insight into how to reach them, they've probably got some keys to the kingdom there that would really shorten your learning curve here. And I hope they would be willing to help you out there.
Well, it's interesting because I didn't realize, is it all right if I make a comment here, or you?
No, go ahead.
Well, the college student problem is starting to, when you had your slide about, you know, marketing to college students, you know, originally I wrote the book sort of in reaction as well to my students feeling so lonely and disconnected. But because of the rise in what's called human flourishing projects, so Harvard has a human flourishing center, UVA has a lot of money coming in for, they're calling it human flourishing projects. And then I know Penn State has a primary, a PI on that project too, and then other universities. So I sent the book to Harvard. I sent the book to the lead, the manuscript. I just said, look, maybe this will help because the connection between conversations and human happiness. So maybe that's a way I could market to, university settings who are interested in increasing student belonging and connection. And there's an aspect of human flourishing related to faith communities. So I could see that working as well. So anyway, that resonated when you could do college. Obviously churches are already seeking out, they would love to use this material. And then obviously what I'm already doing with, the speaking circuit and radio. So I love that.
I think that's a marvelous idea. You're thinking in exactly the right direction, very specific. It gives you something to tackle. It's very tangible. I happen to have a friend who's chaplain at Hamline University, and I graduated myself from a university that had a strong Methodist tradition.
Yes.
So I'm thinking here of universities that clearly have some sort of tie-in to religion. That's probably a terrible word, but they have religion at their founding. And so I would imagine those would be kind of at the top of your list.
Yes.
Yeah. Chaplains, university chaplains.
I know this will happen. Yeah. Moody often has me give them 50 names of key influencers. And since I've written so many books with them, I want to change that list up. But now I'm thinking what I need to do is give them 50 student chaplain names. And then they send the book with a little letter. That's a great idea. I think I'm 100% doing that.
Excellent. The other market that to me comes to mind is anyone who's interested in spirituality, which, to me is kind of just like this soft, hazy term for people with beliefs that don't necessarily fit into any particular tradition. And maybe they pick and choose what they like from whatever tradition. So, the sorts of books that come out of like maybe Hay House or Red Wheel, Wiser, like I'm sure the sorts of publishers and books I mean. I think books like Gary Chapman's book, was he a minister? Like he's definitely from a Christian background.
Yes, he was a pastor, I believe. And just to note, maybe this will encourage your audience. I learned from my publicist that book did not sell very well the first 5 years. It took time for 5 Love Languages to sell the billions of copy, that it has. And you're right, it still is on the bestseller list everywhere. So, But it took time.
It does typically take time. So in any event, so this brings me kind of to the next thing that I wanted to discuss. Well, actually, no, it's a little further out. So before I get there, so here's one of the things you'll have to think about that's just as important, if not maybe more important in the long run, especially since I know you have other books coming out now that may not exactly fit under some of the rubrics we're discussing. So your bio.
Yes, it needs to be updated. It's very bad. I know and I've written like 8 books since then. I know I'm making a list of things Moody needs to do for me.
So yes, everywhere your bio appears, when you're marketing this book in particular, if the bio is very Christian forward or Christ forward, Christian forward, people will see it and go, oh no, is this book going to be preachy? Or, we make all sorts of assumptions based on the author's background and bio. So, you may decide, look, this is who I am, and people should just know it up front. Or you may just want to give it a back seat. And I think if you read Gary Chapman's bio at this point, I had to work a little bit to find out his background. It's his book that's front and center, not his Christian background.
Right. And
then your website, of course, because of your publishing history, it makes total sense for there to be scripture on your site and for there to be references to Jesus. And this is for those who haven't visited Heather's site. If you go to the very bottom, there's this passage, which I screen captured because it's the most directly Christian material maybe that I found, aside from the books themselves. So you'll want to think about this too, because if you were going to build as many marketing opportunities as possible for this book, again, you don't want to dampen anyone's enthusiasm and thinking, oh, you're going to show up with a Christian message. And
oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, Moody's team is doing my website redesign this month in order to align better with the color scheme of that book, and to make it front and center. Do you think that it will disappoint or confuse my Christian readers that I've somehow like diluted my faith, or that, how you get Christian celebrities where that often happens, they become very famous and then suddenly they're no longer theologically sound, or they seem like they've sold out and you can't trust them as good theologians. Like, are you nervous about that for me at all?
I would trust your judgment on that, whether or not
Okay.
it's going to hurt you with the other books. But I think this is like, you've just gotten at the heart of the issue here, which is, how do you want to move forward and how do you want to be seen? Do you want to still remain strongly positioned as a Christian author in a Christian market? Or do you want to gradually move away from that? Or do you want to try and do both at once? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it takes juggling. So for example, if you wanted to preserve your platform and your brand for the Christian audience, that might be an argument for having a separate site for the book, this new book.
Ooh.
I almost never suggest that because it's more work. You're kind of splitting your brand at that point. But there can be good reasons for it. And this is a potential good reason. But a lot of it depends on, how do you see your future career as an author? Is it going to be strongly tied to the Christian market, even if you have some of these projects that are of a more general nature? Are you going to be eventually circling back to more books related that are more strongly for the Christian market? I know these are tough questions and you don't have a crystal ball, but this is where you have.
Yes, I could see moving more in the direction of academic social science with a Christian bent, because I am an associate teaching professor at Penn State, and a lot of people see that like on your website, Jane, you talk about you love being that bridge between these worlds. Like, your academic friends don't think you're quite as, I forget how you said it. Like, your literary friends think you're too academic. Your academic friends think you're, you know what I mean?
Yes.
It may be that, like, my Christian friends may think, okay, this is really academic. This is social science. And then my academic friends will probably say, I love this book. It was a little too Christian for me. So maybe I can just kind of know that's who I am, and that's okay. I may confuse people. And I may just start speaking more about that. Like, that's what it's like when you're in these different worlds. There's a lot of, multiple ways to access the things I care about. Okay. I love this. This is so helpful.
Good. So I do think you can try and straddle these markets if you wish, and then let people read into it to some extent, especially on your website is what I'm thinking of here. Let people fill in the gaps for themselves. And try to keep it loose so that people can read themselves into it wherever they go. But what I'm suggesting, go ahead.
Do you think, I don't know if your listeners are also asking this, do you think the website is actually the most important thing? In your experience, do you think, because Moody is directing a lot of resources to making sure I have a good author website. Do you personally go to author websites right away? Or would you rather be at the podcast, or are they blogging? I don't know. I just wondered, that was one of the questions I had for you. Like, if I'm going to direct resources somewhere, is the website the most important thing?
I think for your long-term career, yes, because it basically plants a flag about who you are, what you stand for, what your body of work is, and it packages a story for people about who you are and what you stand for. So it's something that the media looks at, reviewers look at, people who want to have you speak or be on their podcast. Almost always they're going back to your website for kind of the official line on who you are and what you do. Now, will your website play some monumental role in sales of the book? Probably not. But I think it does express something pretty important about who you are career-wise, brand-wise as an author.
Perfect.
All right. So this is leading us to something I would encourage you to do to help kind of figure out what you want to say about yourself or how you want to position yourself. These are like really deep questions, I think, which we
I know,
probably
I
can't.
feel like I'm in therapy. I feel like I'm in therapy. This is good. Yes. By the way, the podcast is a huge surprise to me. I did not realize that you can start a podcast and get 42,000 downloads. I had no idea that podcasting was that thing. I have more people listening to my podcast than any other thing I do.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned that because I did want to bring up the podcast, and it's very Jesus-y, I think, at least from what I've seen.
Yes.
And so it's going to be really hard for you to disassociate
Right.
from a podcast that's focused in that way. I assume you're not going to abandon it, and it looks pretty strong.
Well, I'm waiting. I'm getting sponsorship for season 2. So this is kind of even out. I did it, as you can see, in 2019. And then with COVID, I took a break. But the Moody is interested in relaunching based on the conversation book. So it would be time to pivot. Mm-hmm. Now is a good time to think about that. So that's good.
Great. So I'm aware of like really big name authors who are able to straddle these markets effectively. I think there's also some maybe comments coming through in the chat that we'll get to where people are making suggestions of who you might check out. But like Anne Lamott is like the author I think of, especially someone who's known to writers that, I think she's pretty well known as a Christian. And she recently had a killer op-ed in the New York Times. For those who, if you haven't been exposed to her work, I'd read that op-ed. It's a really good introduction to how she can really center her Christianity, but she is speaking to everyone. And she's able to pull it off really well. So what I'm moving into here is just comp research, like other authors who've been able to bridge this and successfully. Obviously, Gary Chapman is kind of the name here. He's literally the name on your book. And he doesn't have a website. Well, his book has a website, but he doesn't have a website for himself. He does have the speaker page at his speakers bureau. And, just again, interestingly, everything just focuses on the success of his book rather than, the fact he's a Christian. So obviously I think you can make that a bit of a backseat, and no one's I don't think your market is going to, the Christian market, I don't think is going to take offense in any way.
Okay.
I do notice this gets into the weeds a little bit. His book, the 5 Love Languages, as far as the book's metadata and categorization are concerned, he ranks number 1 in Christian marriage for his book. On the ebook, number 6 for the print book in Christian marriage, but he's also number 10 in the general market for marriage books. So I find that pretty interesting. Just, he hasn't been knocked off his perch in the Christian market. He's competing against a much larger market otherwise. And I imagine Moody is likely to categorize your book. For those who don't know, in the book publishing industry, there are separate categories for Christian books, or for really any book that adheres to a specific belief system. So, Judaism, Muslim, all of them have their own categories. And so publishers can choose multiple categories. And I assume that Moody is going to choose Christian, whatever would apply here, Christian self-help or something like that. I hope that they also apply a general category, and I would ask them what their plans are.
What would it would just be self-help? I don't know enough about what the category. I know that for mine, it's like Christian living. I've done, Bible study. I don't know enough about what those categories would be. Do you know one that you would put it in?
I mean, you don't have to worry so much about this precise category they're putting it in. I just want you to know that there are Christian categories and then all the other categories that aren't affiliated with a religion. And I think you want both here. Just as Gary Chapman has his book in both, you want yours in both.
Okay, can I ask a totally unrelated question and you don't have to answer it? Are
Sure.
you personally part of a speakers bureau? I got caught up on when you said this is a people have asked me why I'm not in a speakers bureau. I like to do all my own booking. We could do a whole nother session. Are you part of one, Jane, or do you do all your own?
I do on my own. I
Okay.
actually did reach out to a speakers bureau at one point in time because I knew someone who was represented and asked
Yes.
if he thought there might be interest there, if I should inquire, and he like made an introduction for me.
Okay.
But what I quickly realized is that I'm not big enough to have a speakers bureau. Like I'm not getting paid enough, because
Okay.
they take a cut,
They do.
and it's overly complicating what are ultimately very simple transactions.
I agree. Okay, good. That confirms I have not joined a speakers bureau, and that confirms why for me. So, okay. Thank
But
you.
I'm not inundated with requests. I think for
Okay.
people who are getting just streams of requests, I'm sure Chapman is, a speakers bureau helps. They really help save your time and energy of filtering through all those. If you feel like you can manage the incoming requests and you haven't had any issues, I would stay the course there.
That sounds right.
All right. So here are, I was just curious to look at bestsellers currently, like this, realize this is a totally momentary, but it has unearthed current bestsellers. Self-help category, I was just wondering how much does spirituality, religion, etc., infiltrate this list? This is not the Christian self-help, just your garden variety self-help. We've got the 4 agreements, which it's not Christian, but it's got some of the spirituality in there. Brene Brown's a Christian. I mean, she may have a conflicted relationship with religion. I don't know, but I think of her as kind of a Christian sort of author. Eckhart Tolle, another spirituality sort of person. The 5 love languages we've discussed. The Untethered Soul is another spirituality. And then I put in Jordan Peterson just
Yes.
to show the dramatic poles that are represented in self-help. This is not a recommendation for any book listed here, just a sense of the diversity that you find, and that it's okay to have some Christian worldview or beliefs in a book that falls into self-help. So
That's
encouragement.
really
Now, I wanted to also offer kind of a counter example of who your market probably isn't. Now, this is just a guess, and I'm not saying I just wanted to be able to contrast. There's something called the School of Life. It's a UK-based organization. Have you heard of it?
Well, I looked into, I thought you were going to do Trigger Conversations, which is the UK nonprofit about helping people have better conversations. They actually contributed an endorsement for the book, so I was wondering if you were going in that direction, but no, I have heard, but I thought you were going to talk about Trigger Conversations, but go ahead.
So the School of Life has some, they have a lot in common with you on the conversation bit. Like, they're very interested in helping people foster better lives through friendships, relationships, conversations. They have like conversation kits that you can put on the dinner table, and they have these like question cards. And I really love this company, but it is like secularist through and through. Like the founder of this organization wrote a book called Religion for Atheists. You can't get much more secular than this group, and it's proudly that way. It's not denigrating religion; it's just saying we're past that. So I think these people, like when you're thinking about your marketing plan, it's probably not these folks. I don't think you are going in so far in this direction that you would be marketing to that audience. But when you could still steal some marketing ideas from them, just FYI. If you look through their shop, you'll just see all sorts of different products and merchandise and videos and content that I think might inspire you when you decide, to do a more general marketing plan. Okay, so we have now reached the end, and we have a lot of chat messages and some questions that I want to go through and see if they spark any thoughts or ideas from you, Heather. I'm just going to kind of scroll to the beginning and give me a second here to see what we've got. Marlou is wondering, how would people even know that this book that you've written is in fact a Christian book from the Amazon description that I read? And I think that's actually the point in my mind. Like, if you read that description, you don't know. And I think that's very intentional. What do you believe that's the case, right?
I think when we were doing that descriptive writing, I remember being strategic about that because I didn't want people to think it was a devotional Christian book, which it's not. We're not moving through scripture to help you, grow in your faith. It's a very practical, more social sciencey book. I think that it comes from Moody Publishers would be the thing, but maybe people don't know that press. But so that's a good point. Yeah, you don't even know it's a Christian book other than me. I don't know. I have to look at the back cover copy because we talk about in the bio on the back of the book, they talk about Seated with Christ and that I wrote an award-winning book on evangelism. So that would let people know. Yeah.
So that would be the tip off. Yeah. And whether you want to tip people off, again, is a strategic choice in my mind.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't mind people being like, oh, I thought this was a different book. It was too Christian for me. That wouldn't be bad. That's just not, it wasn't for them. They thought it was something. I mean, you can look at the table of contents and know we're talking about theology. So it wasn't like a bait and switch kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, we don't. I want to make clear, no one is I'm not advocating a bait and switch. Just
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Stephen is wondering if Henry Cloud's marketing would be good for Heather to examine and selectively adapt. But I don't know who Henry Cloud is. Do you, Heather?
Yes, I'm familiar with him and have been at events with him. And he is the Christian author. He wrote Boundaries. He wrote Toxic People. You may know the book Necessary Endings. He's really pivoted to the business world as well, helping business people. That's a great idea. Thank you so much. That is a great suggestion.
Fabulous. Rebecca is commenting about how everyone has to choose for themselves which identities are most important for them and which parts that they're willing or unwilling to compromise. To her, and she's non-Christian, everything in your marketing signals that your work is purely for a Christian audience, which is good feedback to have. And she doesn't know how your Christian audience would react if these signals were reduced. And I don't know either. Let's see. We've got Kelly mentioning she loves going to authors' websites, as do I, but I'm a little bit of a website nerd.
By the way, that website was made in 2015 when that was a cool look. And it used to be really cool. So they're redoing it. It's going to look much more modern and, up to date. So check it out, in a month or so, it'll look different.
And let's see. Some more discussion of Henry Cloud, people catching up to who Henry Cloud is. Paola is mentioning, she says, she reads your work, Heather, and she thinks of this as a way you serve your readers. Tim Keller, she says, has written a vast body of work. While most of it serves to challenge and encourage a Christian audience, he's also written on occasion for readers who aren't. He is serving both with a specific message.
That's true. He also gets a lot of hate, though, for that. I've seen a lot of criticism lately of poor Tim Keller. No, I know.
By Christians?
Well, sometimes people worry that he's watering down a message too much, or I've seen criticism if he's too Christian or too dogmatic about something, but that's just on Twitter. So everyone needs to get off of Twitter. No, just kidding. So,
they
but
do.
I do think Tim Keller, that's a good example. That is a good example. I've mostly only read his Christian work though. So I would like to go look and see what he's doing. So
my colleague, Allison K. Williams, often says of challenges like this, when you have one, tie bells on it, which is her way of saying, take this perceived weakness or problem and admit it and be transparent about it up front, address it in some way so that it doesn't feel like you're hiding something. And that,
Yes.
so, that's food for thought.
Perfect. I love that.
Let's see. Just checking the chat again. Hold on. I see Rebecca dropped in the link to the New York Times piece. Appreciate that. Thank you. Yvette mentions something interesting. Anne Lamott brings God into nearly everything she writes, but in a way that is non-theological. It's interesting. Someone wants me to clarify the life I just mentioned. That was School of Life. It's a UK-based organization, but you can easily get their classes or products as an American. Let's see. Rebecca says maybe if an overt Christian perspective is essential to the work, and that's actually a good thing to ponder, Heather, if you do think it's essential, because that might affect how much you do want to market to a broader audience. So if the overt Christian perspective is essential to the work and the broader audience could be then the more laid back Christian consumer who doesn't consume a lot of Christian media, but they're fine accepting Christianity as the baseline perspective. So it's interesting. I feel like we're developing this sense here of like, there's a spectrum of people who on that Christian line who identify as Christian, retired from being Christian, are fine with people who are Christian, recognize that there's wisdom to be found there, and those who are turned off and will just never engage with it. There's probably some good market research to be done there, just looking at various books and strategies and approaches that capture the people who are open, and while not trying to signal to those who are, it's a turnoff that this isn't for them.
That's so interesting. That comment is a genius comment, because honestly, it's making me realize the book can stand without any of the Christian content because of the social science research. And so, but as I wrote it, I wanted to understand that like social science is often not, my standard for like truth. So I wanted to be able to say, yeah, this is good research, but we've kind of known this all along from the wisdom of the Bible, but it can actually stand without me bringing that in. So now that's really making me think about, I don't think people will be upset or offended when they read it. They'll just be like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, the science is awesome. And she can find evidence of it in the Bible. That's cool. Let's move on to the next chapter. I don't think, I think they're going to find it more social sciencey, but I love that question. Can it stand without it? And it actually can. It just was joyful for me to combine them because it is who I am.
Yeah.
So thank you.
All right, so going over to the Q&A box, and this is where you can probably take a bit of a mental break, Heather, because some of this won't necessarily apply to you. Jean's wondering if she says her quest memoir doesn't fit neatly into one audience, and she's willing to work with a publicist, I guess, to help her figure out this challenge. Memoir is always difficult to advise on because it's very different, I think, from the project we're talking about with Heather, because Heather's book is addressing a perceived need or a problem that people want to solve. And we usually pick up such books for very different reasons than that we would pick up a memoir. Memoirs are stories, and as such, they're partly entertainment, which we gain enrichment from or we learn lessons from. So she mentions also this is a quest. Her quest memoir is a quest to find a church she can live with. Ah, fascinating. I'm interested in that. So I would say, if the quest is to find a church you can live with, gosh, I mean, the first thing I think of is Unitarian Universalist sort of folks. So there's definitely like a marketing plan you can put around that. And you're really looking for kind of like what I call lookalike, or what marketers call lookalike audiences. So a lookalike audience would be people who go to Unitarian Universalist churches. That would be a lookalike audience, perhaps, for your book, the people who have similar concerns or ideas or challenges. To find lookalike audiences, you can think about what are the publications they read, what are the events they attend. It's like when I put up the slide with the different market segments. So you have to identify, the places that they go or the people that they listen to, and you start to develop these marketing personas that you can attach marketing plans to. Kim says, I've had a middle grade fantasy series published, as well as a few picture books. I'm interested in moving into historical fiction, YA, and adult. And can I let out your secret, Heather? I don't know if it's a secret. She has a YA novel coming out next year, which of course adds another layer of complexity to this conversation, but we're going to table that.
Yes.
So Kim's also dabbling in both, or publishing, I should say, in both fiction, nonfiction, adult and children, and YA. And so she's wondering naturally about how to design a website and have a brand in a way that encompasses everything. Or does she need a separate identity for every branch? Now, obviously, in this session, I suggested to you, Heather, that there is a path I could see where you have a separate site for this book. I'm not saying it's ideal or that you should, but it's one way to do it. In this case, Kim, boy, it seems like a lot of work to have separate sites. Even James Patterson doesn't have separate sites for adult and children's, because for those who don't know, he publishes children's work as well. I don't think there's a genre he doesn't touch at this point. But when you first go to his website, you have to choose. Do you want to go to the adult James Patterson books, or do you want to go to the Jimmy Patterson books for kids? And so even he tries to keep it all under one roof, which is what I recommend. The only time that I suggest splitting things out is when you have some sort of blockbuster property like a Harry Potter, or you've got a book that has special needs, where there are features or resources or things, and you just want a site that focuses on that. So if, for example, if you look at Gary Chapman's book-focused website, you can see that sort of plan in action. So Kim, I would try to keep everything under one roof and just make it really clear from the navigation or the homepage where people go to find your children's work, your fiction work, your nonfiction work, and they can self-direct. I think audiences tend to be pretty accepting of all of the different things that you do. I mean, I think we've talked about some of the tensions between Christians and not Christians in this session, but religion aside, I think generally people think it's pretty neat when you're interested in multiple things. Let's see. Mark wonders, if you choose to branch out from your core audience, is it best to approach your new subject with a pen name? I find this a pretty personal question. Heather, is that something you considered with this? I'm not saying you should have, but did it cross your mind?
Oh, you mean for the young adult or for the conversation book?
Either.
No, because honestly, because the branding of my speaking events in the fall are seated, sent, and 6 conversations. So people are booking me for all 3, like seated with Christ, sent, living the sent identity, and then 6 conversations. So, and the young adult is derivative of seated with Christ. It's a derivative work. So, but if I were to move into adult contemporary fiction, I would 100% choose a pen name. So yes. Also because Moody has standards about, what can be included. I would probably have to go with a different publisher because Christian, there's so many rules to follow if you're writing Christian adult fiction. So I would move in a different direction.
Yes. So that's an excellent example of like a really strong reason, I think, to have a pen name if you branch out into other areas. Other reasons could be like if you write erotica and children's picture books, you don't really want one side to be crossing over with the other. So there can be these really good market reasons for the pen name. My caution though for folks is not to do it willy-nilly, like have a really strong strategic market-oriented reason for it. because it is like starting a different business. You know, you have to build equity in every name you create. So let's see. Stan's wondering if it's feasible for Heather to have two separate websites with each one directed to a specific market. And I think that's feasible. It's just a lot of work, and I don't know if it's merited. So Mark is curious, Heather, what seemed to open the most doors for you in terms of opportunities to speak?
You know what? This is probably not the answer that you want. I felt like I just got really lucky. I did one talk at a very large event that had 5,000 people. And I spoke on this moment I had reading Ephesians 2 about being seated with Christ. And then I got booked for a national winter conference. And then after that, I have had endless speaking events because the people there represented, the people in the audience all represented churches or college ministries. So I have never not had a booked speaking schedule from Seated with Christ. And then I don't know what else to say. You just need one good moment where the right people are in the audience. And I just feel like I had that moment. I don't know. Is that what you're asking? Like, how did it happen?
Yeah.
How did I? Yeah. So, and then actually, and I got the book contract came out of the talk I gave on Ephesians. I was doing like a little Bible study, and my agent was the one that was like, I feel like people are resonating with how you talk about your faith. So let's stop trying to write fiction. I want you to write a nonfiction book. And I sent that out to 6 publishing houses, and Moody happened to read it. And they said, look, we don't know who you are, but we're going to take a chance on you. So that's how it all started. So it just takes the right moment, I guess.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
So Seated with Christ has been the biggest one, but then Sent won an award. And if you win an award, people are going to book you for that. And I don't know if you knew this, but Moody runs Moody Radio, which is an international web of radio stations. So when you're on the radio, people all over the world hear you. And then that. So, but it's always Seated with Christ. Everyone wants the Seated with Christ talk.
Fascinating. I always love hearing about how the ball got rolling.
Yeah, folks. It was just stand up, give a talk in front of people who, and it has to hit a need in the culture. That's what you said, Jane. It was the Kairos moment, the right time. I was speaking about healing from jealousy right as Instagram and Facebook were taking over and people were suffering, comparing their lives. 2015, people were just jealous and miserable. And then that book intervened in that conversation. So I'm hoping the conversation book is intervening in the loneliness crisis. So hopefully I'm hitting a wave. I don't know. A lot of it feels lucky, like luck. I don't know, Jane, what you think. It feels like just you do a lot of things and you hope it hits a cultural moment. I don't know. That's what you did with digital marketing. I felt like that was your moment when you were headhunted by Virginia.
Right.
Yes. That's what happened to you. So.
Yeah. So if you're paying attention to the conversations, the culture, the media around you, like if you're listening to the zeitgeist, it gets easier to be lucky. Yeah. All right. Before we close this out, I just want to ask Heather if you have any other questions, things you were wondering about that we didn't cover.
No, because I am just so excited about the chaplain idea. I can't stop thinking about mailing my book to every Christian college and university and every university that has a spiritual center, which guess what, is all of them.
Yes.
So I've got to figure out how to do that and make a cute little press kit or something. Like I'm excited because it comes out in October. So I've got some time. And I think that's where I'm going to ask Moody to direct the resources. So you basically answered every question I had. I have a lot to think about. I have a lot of soul searching to do about how I'm going to present myself. And I'm excited about it. I'm not discouraged at all. I'm just really excited.
Fabulous. Well, I just want to reiterate, I don't think there's any kind of like wrong decision you could make here. It's just really about where you want to see yourself go and who you want to speak to. So
yes. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for all the participants and the questions. This was a fantastic opportunity. Everyone needs to do it and sign up and see if you're chosen. Bye, Jane.
Thank you. Yes, if for those who would like to be my next victim for Business Clinic or beneficiary, you just have to go to my website, janefriedman.com, go up to the classes tab, and you'll see a special page dedicated to Business Clinic. There will be another clinic edition next month. It'll be with Meg Medina, who's a children's writer, and she's wondering what's the use of a website when people just go to social media, which we touched on a little bit here. It'll be fun to talk with her about that. So thank you, Heather. Thank you all for coming today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope to see you all again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.